Hello everyone, it's Jeff again, and I would like to tell you a story about America's reluctance to join World War II. World War II officially started on September 1st, 1939. For more than 2 years, the United States remained officially neutral in the conflict, and Americans debated whether to stay out of the war or join the Allied forces fighting Nazi Germany. German forces invaded Poland, and 2 days later, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II began. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt gave a speech that day and vowed that the United States would remain a neutral nation. Even on the 18th of May in 1940, a Gallup poll showed that 93% of Americans said we should not get involved in the war in Europe. President Roosevelt knew that eventually America would get dragged into the war, and he also knew that he had to get public opinion behind him that eventually America would have to fight. Winston Churchill once famously said, "Americans can always be trusted to do the right thing once all other possibilities have been exhausted." The movie studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer decided that they wanted to work and put out a movie that would change America's public opinion about whether or not we should enter the war in Europe. The studio hired director William Wyler to work on the picture. They chose to base their movie on a book written by Jan Struther called Mrs. Miniver. When President Roosevelt heard that the movie was being made, he ordered it to be made as quickly as possible because he knew how important it was to change people's opinion about whether or not we should enter the war. The Blitz in London started on the 7th of September 1940, and for the next 57 days it was bombed. And yet this was nearly exactly the same time that the Gallup poll in the United States said that 93% of the people were against joining the war. Production for the film began in the autumn of 1940, when the United States was still a neutral country. Over the several months the screenplay was written, the U.S. moved closer to war. As a result, some scenes were rewritten to reflect America's increasingly pro-British and anti-German outlook. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the U.S. into the war, the garden scene in the movie was refilmed to reflect the tough new spirit of a nation at war. After seeing an early screening of the movie, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the movie more powerful to the war effort than the combined work of 6 military divisions in boosting U.S. support for our blitz-weary nation.
The big event the whole country is talking about, Mrs. Miniver, a timely drama, tuned to the terrific tempo of the world of today. Mrs. Miniver, the story of a valiant woman whose love and devotion shield her family from the cruelest onslaught of devastation ever visited upon mankind. It is a story of youth, too, of young people who hold aloft against the shadow of the present everything that is brightness for the future. Mrs. Miniver is as great in its rich moments of quiet tenderness as in its vivid moments of unbridled terror and sweeping action. You will not soon forget the gallantry of this family of brave and decent people, whose courage is the flaming spirit of a family of brave and decent nations.
The movie was released in New York City on June 4th, 1942. It was a critical and commercial success, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1942, and it won 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress. When Winston Churchill saw a picture of a marquee in New York City playing Mrs. Miniver, he confided to a friend, "It was propaganda worth 100 battleships in our cause." The ultimate endorsement came from an unlikely source, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. He wrote, "Not a single angry word was spoken against Germany. Nonetheless, the anti-German tendency is perfectly accomplished." President Roosevelt ordered that the film be sent to every cinema all across America that was capable of showing it. It would be almost impossible to overstate how important the movie Mrs. Miniver was to changing public opinion about whether or not we should enter the war in Europe. It was a complete flip within 6 months that over 90% of the people were now in favor of entering the war in Europe. It was a phenomenal propaganda movie that changed public opinion all across America. It was shown all over the world. It is simply amazing how much this film changed world history, because it would have been much longer before America would have gotten involved in the war had it not have been for this movie with all of its propaganda being released. And yet the movie today is largely forgotten except by historians. I'm still home sitting in Montesano, Washington, eating a sandwich. And the street I'm on right now, this is the way it would have looked at the beginning of World War II. Remember, everyone, be good to each other, do good deeds, think good thoughts, and I will see you on another adventure.